This conference will now be
2 minutes to go.
Good evening, Mr. Irvin.
Good evening, everybody. Mr. Mayor.
Hello, Miss Roddy.
And MJ, you'll talk about the workshop? And I need to get you the forms, don't I?
Sent me the forms, the flyers.
Oh, good. Okay.
What day did we decide on that? There's a yak meeting, but
Yeah, it's the 1st, March 1st.
okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, I've got 7 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order. Will the city manager please call the roll?
Councilor Roberts,
Here.
youth representative,
Here.
Councilor Fleck,
Here.
Councilor Irvin,
Here.
Councilor Stennett, Councilor Soulsby, and Mayor Dowling.
Here. Okay, we're getting a lot of echoing on this and I don't know what's causing it. So item 3, there's no items to be added to the agenda. Brings us to item 4, appearances of interested citizens for items not on the agenda. This is a time for citizens to comment on items not listed on the agenda for a maximum of 30 minutes. Individual speakers must be recognized by presiding officer, provide their name and address, and will be allowed up to 5 minutes or less with council approval. Comments regarding any matter scheduled for public hearing may be provided only in that hearing. Comments on agenda items may be taken prior to council's discussion on that item. Council will not engage in any discussion or make any decision based on public comments at this time. However, the council may take the comments under advisement for discussion and action at a further council meeting. Since there's nobody in the audience, is there anybody on the computer that would like to talk?
Mayor Dowling, Dwayne Chatty, 1803 West Main Street.
Yes.
Hey, I'd like the city of Cottage Grove to look into the closing down of Charter Communications local office and see if they in fact complied with the franchise agreement, wherein it states, it looks like it was updated in 2015, it was amended in 2015, wherein it states that Charter Communications Spectrum must provide the city of Cottage Grove and its customers with 60 days prior written notice before closing or relocating the office outside of the city. Talking to many of my friends and neighbors and some folks on social media, I'm finding out that that notice was not made to the customers, and therefore I believe that there was not a 60 days notice made to the city. I also don't believe that they've complied with the portion of the franchise agreement that requires them to have 24-hour toll-free customer service with company personnel capable of handling complaints and inquiries 7 days per week, as I've called them multiple times and always got somebody who sounds like they may be in the Philippines or overseas somewhere. And I don't believe that there's a place here in town for people to pay their bills. So I think they've failed to comply with that amended 2015 franchise agreement. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, we will move on to item 5, public hearings. There is none. Item 6, consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, item 7, there's no resolution or ordinances. Brings us to item 8, business from the city council. Item A, follow up on crosswalk striping on East Main and Gateway Boulevard. Mr. Sisson. Yeah.
No, can he move to the microphone, please?
He's
Can't
in
hear.
the microphone.
Oh, I need to come move it to the other plug then.
Well, down here, I can move it.
That's what he does. Hey, Chief, that'll turn back around if you want to get Mr. Sisson on there. The camera.
All right. Can you hear me?
Can you hear him? Mr. Fleck can't hear you.
Okay, I'll speak up. Okay. Let's reset here. This is a follow-up on the crosswalk striping on the East Main Street and Gateway Boulevard. On September 14th, Ms. Gray, joined Gray, submitted an email request asking that we stripe crosswalk.
A crosswalk at East Main. Pardon me. Richard, are we good to go?
You're good.
All right. All right. So at the crosswalk at East Main, Mrs. Gray asked for both corners of 12th and East Main to be striped. In the council's September 28th meeting, they authorized city engineering staff to procure a traffic engineer's consultant services to assess whether adding crosswalk striping to specific street intersections would increase safety for pedestrians. The attached study to the memo submitted by engineer Dan Haga of Branch Engineering focused on pedestrian crossings on East Main at 11th, 12th, 15th, and 17th, as well as crossings along North Gateway Boulevard, ending 500 feet south of West Oswald Avenue. This report explained that an insufficient number of pedestrians were present to make a recommendation for whether safety would be increased by adding crosswalk striping. However, he did add specific recommendation that pedestrians not be encouraged to cross Gateway Boulevard anywhere on the 4-lane section. And finally, he further recommended that the traffic conditions be reviewed again in non-pandemic conditions, and that priority for future analyses should be given to review the traffic conditions at the intersection of 12th, which is nearby land uses that are known to generate pedestrian traffic from residential neighborhoods. I'm here, and Mr. Haga is here as well online to answer any counselor questions.
Do we have any questions?
I would add, before we get into questions, our recommendation is to consider a return to the pedestrian safety study once the pandemic is over and pedestrian vehicle traffic returns to normal levels. Any questions?
Mr. Irvin?
When I was reading through this study and looking at the number of cars, I guess the big question for me was, is it just an assumption that the levels are vastly different than pre-pandemic conditions, or how are we basing that? Because I don't know, just driving around and walking around, there's certainly been days where it seems like traffic is more and more people walking around, and sometimes less. So I just wonder why we're assuming that that this is not data that we should act on.
That's a good question, Councilor Urban. Dan, are you online? Are you called in? I don't see his name up there on the list.
Dan Hagan's
He is there and he's muted right now, so he needs to.
Dan, are you muted? Are you able to turn that off? Okay, so until he gets the sound worked out, his analysis looked both at vehicles and pedestrians, as you know. And I don't want to speak for his report solely.
He just lit up.
Okay. Dan, are you able to respond?
Well, he's showing unmuted, but we can't hear him.
Yeah. All right. Dan, if you're able to maybe call my cell phone. Well, let's not do that. Let's try to make this work. Okay. Just chime in, Dan, if you're able to make the sound work. Otherwise, Councilor Urban, I am not the best one to answer your question on this, and we may need to follow up with you after the meeting unless we can get the audio to work.
I think part of the thought behind that question is why did we conduct a study, or why did this group conduct a study if going into it, if there was an assumption that we couldn't count on the data because it was a pandemic? It seems like the recommendation should be that we would delay the study. But I'm assuming we paid for this study. And so that I guess it's a little bit frustrating to have authorized a study, pay for a study, and the recommendations that we do another study.
No, that's a good opportunity to clarify. About half of the fee was spent on this analysis for East Maine and Gateway, and an email exchange with the consultant prior to this council meeting confirmed that the remaining balance would be used to finish the study when we revisit this. So, and then to touch briefly on your original question there, we studied this because two things. Under powers of council, crosswalk striping falls in your jurisdiction. Second, national engineering standards recommend that crosswalk striping not be added to busy, unmarked, or unsignaled intersections without a traffic engineer's analysis. That was my recommendation to council that we discussed in October, or back in September, excuse me. And so that led us down the route towards this study.
Mr. Fleck.
So not really a question, just kind of a comment. When we originally brought this up, I mentioned in the summer, I walk a lot, mornings, evenings, and I will not cross Main Street if there's any traffic at all, except at a controlled intersection. And so I think this study,
even with the numbers, I think shows that if we did want to put a crosswalk in there, we need to put some sort of, medium protection. We need to do some other things. These are the concerns I had. I think the speed limit, combined with the amount of traffic and the visibility, I think it's dangerous. And so, that was my desire to do this study. And I think that, we may see more traffic and more pedestrians, but I think that just, further complicates this discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart, you had a comment?
Brian, if you could correct me if my understanding is wrong, but I think one of the reasons that we wanted to do a study during when pandemic was gone is because we haven't been able to have our Bohemian mining days. We haven't had some of the large events that take place down in that area because of the pandemic, and it may give some valuable information to the engineer in his overall analysis. So we're not saying that the traffic counts are low, but we are not able to have some of the larger events that we normally have throughout the year.
I concur. Any other questions?
Mr. Steen?
So I think that advocating for a crosswalk at 12th and Main was probably the first thing I did when I got on the council in September, and I'll continue to do so. I think there are reasons to cross the street there that a lot of people are there are a lot of people finding a reason to cross the street there because of the dog park, because of Dairy Mart, because of Rally Coffee. I don't think those people are going to walk 2 blocks to 10th or 14th to walk back to those destinations from the neighborhoods across Main Street, which happens to be my neighborhood. So I kind of know a bit from experience. There was a part of the study that said it's possible that there are greater than 10 pedestrians per hour and possibly as many 20 per hour crossing at this location on an occasional basis. That sounds like a lot of people crossing an unmarked part of Main Street, which sounds quite dangerous to me, frankly. And the next paragraph basically says, with those kind of numbers, we would recommend something. When high is entered into the field and the number of pedestrians on the spreadsheet is increased to 20, the default output, consider raised median, curb extensions, or other traffic calming devices, is replaced with crosswalk or with active or enhanced. It just sounds like if we had the numbers in a busier time, pandemic aside, I think it'd be hard to find slower times of year than November and January to gauge who's going to the dog park and Dairy Mart and Rally Coffee. We all know that Bohemia Mining Days is a mess with people trying to cross that part of Main Street specifically. I wonder, I'd be all in favor of continuing to look at this because I think that one serious incident is too many. We've done a lot in response. The city and other agencies have done a lot in response to single incidents of pedestrian fatalities, and I would like to do that before they happen. So I would definitely support continuing to look at this. Thank you.
Mr. Haga, do you want to comment?
I think what the gentleman who just spoke said was pretty much in line with what we were thinking when we made the recommendation for add it again. The school hasn't been in session, and a number of other factors have been involved with traffic being lower and not consistent with the norm lately. So, things will hopefully get back to normal pretty soon. Kids will go back to school, and the regular routine, probably be more crossings there and when there's nicer weather. 12th and Main was kind of a key location, I think, for the study. The other locations, there weren't a lot of people. There weren't a lot of people at 12th and Main either, for that matter. But Walgreens at the end, you can go all the way to 16th down there to There's a signal there. There's a signal by the Safeway. It is kind of the, you know, if you look at it symmetrically, it is kind of the place in the middle there between 10th and 12th, 14th. So, hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. Fleck?
That's all I had.
So I guess I do want to clarify, I'm not opposed to adding something. I just want to make sure it's safe as well. You know, so I mean, flashing lights at a minimum, a controlled intersection, maybe ideally, you know, I don't have any heartburn over those sorts of things other than trying to find the money to do it. You know, even a strip in the middle, although that does now limit, you know, turns, I think, as it says in the study. So, you know, like I said, I'm not saying I'm opposed to doing it. I'm just saying if we do, I believe I read in there that just putting the crosswalk itself actually creates a perception, you know, of safety. And that actually concerns me more than anything else, because like I said, I cross that a lot in the summer when it's busy, and it is dangerous. That's
sorry, people are going, you know, 35, I think, through there, and it's not marked. The concern with the raised median would be left turns would have to stop in the through travel lane, you know, to turn there left. It's not really that big of a deal, but it could be an issue, you know.
Any more questions, comments? Mr. Stennett?
I think I meant to comment along with that I would certainly support, in conjunction, some form of education and outreach on crosswalk safety in Cottage Grove. I think we are overdue. I think a lot of people, maybe the vast majority of people, don't know that you have to stop when someone enters a crosswalk that isn't controlled by a signal. It is definitely dangerous and something we would have to spend some energy conveying to the public and to ensure people's safety.
You see the paddles around. Eugene has them a lot when they do a median on a 3-lane section. There'll be a paddle that says state law with a stop sign and a pedestrian on it. Those are pretty common. I don't know if Cottage Grove has any of those or not. Not a full height sign. Those work pretty well for, you know, helping educate people that are already on the road.
Mr. Fleck?
So with the manual of uniform traffic control devices, or whatever the manual is that determines speed limit, so if this were a concern for us, could that also then do a speed study to potentially lower the speed limits?
Well, the circumstances are that the Oregon Department of Transportation has jurisdiction on all roadways for speed limits, except, I believe, maybe local streets. So if you want to have a speed study, if you think there's an issue, you'd have to consult with ODOT, and ODOT would do their study. It doesn't cost anything. It's kind of hard to get ODOT to approve one or approve a reduction, because they go out and they monitor vehicle speeds approaching, and they get a certain number of approaching vehicles with the radar, and they get an 85th percentile speed from that, and whatever the 85th percentile speed is, but within 5 miles per hour is what the designated speed becomes, or the posted speed is ruled as. So, like, the cart comes before the horse on that, just the way ODOT does it.
I would follow up with that, Councillor Fleck. I'll be reporting a short study to City Manager regarding various communities in our region, such as Roseburg and a couple others, who have taken advantage of a new state law that allows a certain amount of discretion in lowering streets by 5 miles an hour. And in the case of Roseburg, they lowered their speed limit 5 miles an hour on a fairly busy street. So we'll follow up with you on that and report back through city manager on what our options could be.
If I can interject, can I interject here?
Excuse me?
Jay, can I say something with that? I moved up here a year ago. Can I speak out now? This is my first meeting.
Yeah, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Carl Richer. I live on 1115 South 8th Street here in Cottage Grove. I moved up here a year ago. What I see is that the speed limit is not even, people aren't even caring about the speed limit. That speed limit that you guys are referring to on Maine is 30 miles an hour, and I go 30 miles an hour, but people are speeding down there all the time, even on some of these other streets. Not just Main Street, but doing a speed study and spending the money on that. I think enforcing the speed limit is what really needs to happen. And to me, it's unsafe for my grandkids to even be out in the front yard down on my street. And I live on a small street, and it is crazy down there on Main Street.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for hearing me.
Mr. Myers?
Yeah, we've presented the question on that reduction by 5 miles to our attorney, and one of the things we're looking at is if we do a speed study, do we do the speed study first and get a number from ODOT and then do the 5 mile knockdown on it, or do we try to do that first and get a more effective way of getting the speeds down? So we'll get back to you on that as well when we get all that figured out.
Is there any other questions, comments?
Mr. Mayor, Dwayne Caddy, 1803 West Main Street, Cottage Grove, Oregon. I think you're here tonight to discuss whether or not to have another study done once COVID goes away. And earlier today, I thought I learned that we were going to have to pay for this again. But if in fact we're not going to pay for it again, if the money's already there and it's already spent, then I would support conducting another study of these two areas to determine if crosswalks would suffice. Thank you.
Thank you. Was Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did I hear that the chief is present with us this evening?
Yes, he is.
I agree with the sentiment of the first caller about the enforcement side of things, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to have results, and we can do the best we can we could lower the speed limit down to 15 or something low, but if people just aren't following it, I'm just wondering if the chief can speak to the enforcement efforts that go along in terms of the speeding and his perception, and if he's seen things as being adequate, or if there's just not enough resource. Maybe the chief could speak to that.
This is Scott Shepard, Cottage Grove Police Department. Councilor Urban, we tried to do enforcement and directed enforcement on areas of the city not really pertaining to what the speed limit is, but what the violations appear to be and the complaints that we receive because of them. We've been running the radar signs around the different areas, trying to educate people on what the speed limit is and then what their traveling speed is by the flashing display from the speed sign. We're looking into other options to alert people to specific speed zones. My patrol officers are directed to do radar patrol every single day, and they rotate around to where there are complaints or where there's habitual problems with people speeding. Unfortunately, we can't always be at the location where people notice that people are speeding. There's certainly speed on South 99, I think because of the roadway and because they just think that it's a wider open area. We'll continue to do those speed enforcements and direct patrols. And I agree with Councilor Stinnett that we can do more crosswalk safety education. We've tried to do that kind of training and teaching and stuff when school was open, because it seems like young adults and children would be a good audience to get in a habit of paying attention to crosswalk safety, and maybe they would pay attention when they got to driver's age. But that's something that we can look at, and I can ask the community service officers to put some programs together and see what other areas have done and see what we can do for our community. Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, how would you, for the caller, it sounds like if you're noticing a lot of speeding going on your street or in your area, would you be recommending that the citizens call in to the main police line and just kind of give you guys a heads up? Or what would be the most effective way to communicate?
Yeah, that's a great way to get the information to us. I'm never shy about asking for people that notice problems in our community to let us know what those problems are, and then we'll make a point to address them the best we can. A call to the business line, the 541-942-9145 number, extension 1, gets you right to dispatch, and dispatch can take the information, and if it's urgent or there's a situation that needs addressed right away, they will dispatch officers immediately. If it's a directed patrol or a notice that in certain areas there's certain speeders that go through, even particular cars, it is helpful for us to get in the area and find those violators. So yes, calling the police department would be a great start.
And what information should people pay attention to about the vehicle? You need color, make, model, license plate, or just general description?
As much information that we can get, the better. Just a vehicle that is blue in color with 4 doors isn't very helpful to us. But the more information and the more details that we're able to get, the more effective we'll be.
Thank you.
Nick, anything else?
I just had a question, Chief. When you and I were in high school, that stretch of Main Street was 4 lanes and 25. What's changed?
It's not 4 lanes anymore.
I know, but it's faster speed limit and there's more business down there because
there is.
You know, Safeway has a lot more traffic than W&W did.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's more businesses there, and I agree with Councilor Stinnett. There are certain times that there's a lot of people that walk through there, and certainly when you're driving around town all the time, like patrol officers do, you see a lot of pedestrian traffic. But I don't think it's traffic that happens a large portion of the day. It's at certain times of the day, and I agree that the study I think is a little incomplete, but I think that it's information that we can use and compare to hopefully a post-COVID world that maybe is a little bit more normal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Irvin? Then Mr.
So,
Stinnett.
like I agree. I think that there is a lot of traffic, foot traffic that goes. The study was, you know, it was a study done at a particular time over a particular period of time, and I don't think it really captures what's happening on day to day. Did we just kind of pigeonhole ourselves by having a study done that reaches a conclusion without a further study that we should not do? You know, that a crosswalk should not be put in, or what do we run the risk of if we say, hey, we all think it is, and the study is basically saying, hey, we're not catching everything that we could be, and maybe it's due to the pandemic. What, you know, if there's consensus or of moving forward with saying, hey, we need to actually put something in here, what would be the next steps? And is that, are we now kind of tied to waiting for the study to be redone later?
Let me take that question first, and city manager can correct me in terms of procedure. But you have under powers of council the discretion to place a crosswalk there. From an engineering standpoint, the original report that I submitted to you was submitted in the context from an engineering perspective. I can tell you that I support that crosswalk, but I cannot recommend to council a situation that opens the city up to liability. The liability aspect of that was the METCD recommendation to not put a crosswalk in, and I shouldn't violate that from a professional licensure standpoint, and let a traffic engineer must take a look at that and recommend it in lieu of a civil engineer's license. Now we're getting into the weeds on the engineering and liability. However, back to the top, I believe council has discretionary power to order city staff to put down a crosswalk. We all know what that sidewalk looks like during Bohemia Mining Days and other events, or just a group of half a dozen kids walking down the street with two of them in the bike lane walking down. So there's a combination of land uses there, like Dairy Mart and Dog Park and coffee and a vibrant community that we see them walking every day in that, even during COVID, especially during COVID. But we did not have, or the report did not have enough for the analyses to rise to the level to make a recommendation. We can look ahead. Council can look ahead and say, you know, there's enough here. It is up to you.
Mr. Stennett.
I guess I had a similar or a question regarding the follow-up. I mean, what does the post-COVID world look like? How long do we wait for that to happen? I would imagine with warmer weather comes a lot more activity, pandemic or not. I would imagine that we have some version of those summer events that bring those people across that road. I don't want to wait until something bad happens. How do we get back to this as soon as possible and find something that works for us?
Mr. Fleck?
So I think, I hope we are talking about more than just putting some paint down on the street. You know, that I think will create some liability, and I do think is actually more dangerous than not having any. So I guess the question for me is, if we want to go forward, do we have the money to put in some speed, you know, reduction features, or an island or something, or flashing lights? And where would we come up with that money?
Faye, could you answer on the monetary? In terms of the decision to put a package of a pedestrian crosswalk in with certain elements, signage, curbs, pedestrian refuge, I would want to go back to the drawing board and put that together in a separate report and make sure we're not throwing a bunch of nuts and bolts in the barrel and hoping for the best tonight. I'd rather study that question and not belabor it, not get into analysis paralysis, but I'd rather pause on that and have a recommendation from council telling us, please study what could go in the short term. And then on the monetary, I'm going to hand that ball to Faye.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. So I'm envisioning and listening to the conversation that the recommendation is probably going to be a crosswalk. It's very similar to the one that the city built 2.5 years ago over on Row River Road. 3 lanes. We had a pedestrian safety median in the center for respite, and then of course the blinking lights and everything. That crosswalk cost the city about $110,000. So if we're looking at a very similar crosswalk, I'm guessing it's going to be that price tag. At the present time, in this year's budget, we have allocated all of our street resources to the 4th Street project, Safe Routes to Schools. With the gas tax money coming in lower, we're going to be close to making our budget work. Hopefully we'll see some revenues increase. It would need to be a project that we would need to put into next year or 2 years from now if it's that type of a revenue request to the budget. But we can certainly look at trying to put something in the fiscal year coming up if that's what the engineers recommend that we install there.
Why would it look different than 10th Street?
10th Street, Mayor, we couldn't install a safe median there because of the turning requirements for people to turn down 10th Street. The median, the safety median would have been right in the turn lane towards 10th Street. We put in some lights, and in analyzing those lights, I would recommend that we put in a little bit more robust. I'm sure our Mr. Sisson would agree that those lights are, I mean, they work and they function, but they're not as bright as they could be as the crosswalk that's on Row River Road. So I would think that we would want to have a safe crossing, and I don't believe in the report that Mr. Haga did that just painting lines across the crosswalk is potentially maybe going to give some false safety to the pedestrians that are in that crosswalk without being built to today's standards.
I just wonder with that being a four-way intersection, I could see where having an island would create issues for traffic trying to turn. You know, depending on what side of the island you put it on, you're going to interrupt where they're using that center lane as a turn only. Now you're going to block traffic back up while they're waiting to make that crossover in front of oncoming traffic.
Yeah, so the ultimate, now that you say that, the ultimate probably would be to put in a fully lit intersection with turn signals and stops in all direction. That would probably be the ultimate safe crossing to be installed there. And I don't have a price on what it would take to do that.
Mr. Irvin?
Does something like that fully lit up intersection, I mean, are there state funds to help with that, or ODOT funds? Or is that anything you do to a city street except lower the speed limit? Is that all on us?
Yep.
I believe it's all on us, but Ron, you're on here. Bradsby, maybe you could speak to the cost of the intersection that was placed at Thornton and Mosby Creek, or Whitaker. You might remember the cost that fully lit up intersection cost. And then was that fully borne with city revenue?
The project that you're speaking of was done all by city funds or urban renewal funds at the time. I want to say they were approximately $250,000 a piece when we did Mosby Creek. Just in the signalization now, like Mosby Creek, Whitaker, Maine, and Thornton, there was some extra work done. You know, we on behalf of Branch again, they helped square up the intersection to make traffic flow better and get better visibility. So it cost a little more there, but I'd remind you that's probably 10 years ago, and due to inflation, you know, those numbers could be a little higher. If Dan can still hear us, Dan may have a better estimate for a signalized intersection than I do.
Well, believe it or not, they haven't gone up as you might think. Mosby Creek one did have, I think you guys bought some right of way on that one, and we realigned everything out there. I think there's a pet grooming place nearby or something.
Yes.
And then at the other end on Thornton, also some right of way purchase there, some widening or something. I don't recall for sure. The ones we did a couple of them in Albany. I believe ODOT have a service agreement with ODOT for maintenance on your signals. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, Dan.
Okay. So the current ODOT standard is to have radar detection, which is a little bit easier to work with. You don't cut loops. It doesn't impact the pavement surface. Left turns. So there probably wouldn't be a need for a lot of right of way. I don't know where the sidewalk lies at. Purchase corners, I don't know. I would think it would be around 200 to 250,000. Would be my guess for the signal. Then obviously right of way purchases would be on top of that.
Thank you, Dan.
Mr. Irvin?
So I'd like to make a recommendation that staff bring back to council after having kind of heard this conversation and study it, a recommendation for a traffic control solution for, I think that crosswalk at Maine and 12th. So I'd make that recommendation. If there's support of that, then great.
Very good.
That the direction?
Need a motion, or is that the direction?
We don't need a motion, do we, Richard?
It's a discussion. No.
All right, very good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item B is a 5-year utility financial plan. Mr. Bradsby.
Thank you, Your Honor. In 2007, the City of Cottage Grove hired FCS Group to do an analysis and an update of our system development charges, as well as look at our water, wastewater, and storm drain utility fees, and do a cost of service analysis on our water system. After doing analysis on our utility rates, FCS prepared a utility rate analysis report in 2010, and it laid out a 5-year strategy for each utility. And when I say a strategy, they looked at our revenues and they projected what each utility needed to increase, each utility needed to make to meet the demands of our revenue. In 2010, staff felt that would allow the city to meet our financial policies and would document why increases are necessary. In June of 2010, council adopted a 5-year plan, and ever since that time, FCS has presented an updated version of our financial plan. FCS has completed a new 5-year financial plan and did a cost of service analysis on our wastewater system. Since council adopted no increase in the current 2021 budget year due to COVID, staff has asked, and we modified our contract and asked FCS to update the models to reflect the no increase in 2021 and prepare a 5-year financial plan beginning in 21-22. So tonight you got two presenters, John Ghilarducci and Doug Garbrud, and they will be presenting the findings of their financial report as well as the cost of service analysis. I believe, Doug, you're on first.
Yes, sir.
All right, it's all yours.
All right. Can everyone see my screen okay? Oh, I should be looking at people's faces when I ask that. All right. I got it. I saw a thumbs up, so thank you, sir. I am Doug Gabbard. I'm a project manager with FCS Group. I am joined today by Zach Hazel, who has done a lot of the analytic work, and he will be sharing in this presentation this evening. And also Mr. John Ghilarducci, the principal on this project, is here, and he's going to be available to answer your questions and engage you in further dialogue. I was very humbled by Ron's litany of engagements that the city has had the pleasure of having with the city of Cottage Grove. We are grateful for the long-term partnership and certainly do not take that for granted. And so thank you for allowing us to be your partner in financial planning for your utilities. Today, we're going to look at your utility rates, and we're going to give you a little overview of how we look at utility rates. And then we're going to get mathy and look at your 3 utilities and our recommendations for rates in the near term. Beginning with a little look at utility rate making, we set rates to recover the cost of providing service. You know, these utilities sit in enterprise funds that are supposed to be self-sustaining, and so we help you set rates that are designed to do just that. Well, in recovering costs, we have different kinds of costs that need to be recovered. One type is the operating costs of a utility. These are personnel, these are materials and services like power and chemicals, asset repair and maintenance. These kinds of costs are usually pretty well behaved. They don't change much, except they tend to go up a little bit every year. And it's pretty easy to predict, at least in aggregate, and model them out. Capital costs, on the other hand, big capital projects, those are less well behaved. They tend to be very lumpy, and you have big projects in some years and no projects in other years. And part of the art of rate setting is figuring out ways to smooth out the effects of those big capital projects, whether it is having a couple of very steep rate increases early because you need the money, or whether it is borrowing money so that you can smooth out rate increases over a period of debt service, or some combination of the two, or maybe building up fund balance for projects that need to be done a few years into the future. So that's some of the art of setting utility rates. A couple of ideas we try to abide by that, as I said before, utility rates should generate sufficient revenues to sustain the system. They should charge for the services being provided. They should recover costs equitably, which means that there should never be everyone should be charged in a manner that is fair to the other customers, especially other customers that are similarly situated. That's what we mean by equity. We're going to be getting into a little bit of that on wastewater when we talk about the cost of service analysis. But I'll just leave that there for now. And also achieve city objectives, whether that is water conservation, whether it's the objective of revenue stability. One very common kind of city objective is to make sure that there is a certain amount of minimum fund balance remaining in each utility at the end of the year, and we bake those into our financial models to make sure that that is achieved. So looking at the elements of the revenue requirement, which is the first part of a rate study, a revenue requirement is literally the amount of money that needs to be recovered by rates. And so the things that go into that are, number one, in the upper left, the cost of the capital improvement program. Now, those costs, which can be considerable, those can be mitigated by system development charges. And so we use your current revenue stream of system development charges to have a partially offsetting effect on the cost of your capital improvement program. It's usually not that much. It's never as much as you'd hope. But nevertheless, it is important to include it in the rate model. On the upper right-hand side, you see the operating budget. This is also an important input into the rate setting. These tend to be very well-behaved costs. And in the middle are the fiscal policies, such as a minimum fund balance that we make sure is enforced every single year. So let's get into the math a little bit, and let's start with the revenue requirements for water and storm. And for that, Mr. Zach Hazel will take it away.
Thank you, Doug. All right, so we're going to start with the water utility here, and this panel will lay out the key assumptions that we formulated for going into this study. Starting at the top left, we have our annual cost inflation factors. So these factors are what we inflate costs by every year for the 5 or 20-year forecast period. So for salaries, we're looking at 1.65%, benefits 3.07%, all other operating costs are escalated at 1.77%. And then for construction costs on big capital projects, that'll be 2.79% per year. We also have an annual customer growth rate, you'll see in the bottom left, of 0.9%. The operating forecast in the top right will lay out how we project your revenue and your expenses. So rate revenue is based on your fiscal year 21 budget, and we escalate it based on that customer growth rate. Your operating costs and any non-rate revenues are also based on the fiscal year 21 budget. Down below that are the financial policies that we targeted in our analysis. We're looking for a minimum fund balance of 90 days of O&M, and we're also targeting a capital contingency reserve of $275,000. Here is a graph showing the capital needs forecast for the water utility. As you can see, it's fairly well defined in the first 5 years there. There's a total of 6.3 million projects, 6.3 million in projects for the next 5 years. And our model assumes that a revenue bond on the order of 1.3 million will be taken out in fiscal year 23 to help provide for this capital plan. With that revenue bond, we actually have sufficient rate revenue to we're not required to raise rates to cover that revenue bond shown here. So the bars that you'll see represent the costs, and the line cutting across the bars is the revenues. You have cash operating expenses in that darker bar, and then existing debt service is the green bar above that. As you can see, the pink bar, which is very slim, is the new debt service for that revenue bond we just discussed. And then above that in yellow is any rate revenue that's directed towards capital needs. So as you can see, the rate revenue stays above all of your operating expenses and provides for capital needs. So no revenue or no rate increases are needed to cover the debt service on that new bond. Here's a graph of the fund balance for water. The dotted line represents the minimum targeted balance, and the green bars is, of course, the combined fund balance. We go in fiscal year 25, and we start to grow from there. Eventually, the capital plan will come into clearer focus in the out years. So the fund balance is not expected to grow as much as shown here. It's just that those projects will come online, and the fund balance will be spent down in the out years. Here's an example of the water rates as they currently are. We have a $17.98 for a fixed charge. This is for a single family residence. We're looking at $17.98 for the fixed charge, $25.70 for the system improvement charge, and for 8,000 gallons, that'll come out to $12.02 for a total of $55.70. And then when compared to other cities, you can see that Cottage Grove is near the top, but below Coburg and Cresswell. So that was the water utility. So we're going to take a look at the stormwater utility next. The key assumptions here are all pretty much the same, except for on the bottom right, you'll see that the financial policy section has changed. So revenue in stormwater utilities is a lot more consistent. So we are only targeting 46 days of O&M and a different capital contingency reserve as well of $270K. The capital needs forecast is also much smaller than in the water utility. We are only getting a total of $1.7 million in the next 5 years. As you can see, the revenue requirement forecast for stormwater it looks very good. It's quite a healthy utility here. We have a small amount of existing debt service, a small amount of cash operating expenses, and a lot of the utilities revenue is directed towards capital needs. Here's the fund balance. It stays relatively constant for a couple of years and then begins to grow. But once again, this fund balance picture will look different once more projects become obvious. The stormwater rate is made up of two fees here. We have the system user monthly fee of $494. This is for a single family residence again, and a system improvement surcharge of $753. So the total for a single family residence would be $1247. When compared to comparable cities, Cottage Grove is once again near the top there, but below the likes of Eugene.
All right, thank you, Zach. Now, because I don't like to be left out, I do want to get in the game here and talk to you about the sewer utility. Once again, we have the key assumptions that on the left side and on the top, they're all the same as the previous two utilities. It is the financial policies that are different, with 45 days in O&M, consistent with a lower level of risk in the sewer utility, and also a capital contingency reserve of $190,000. One thing I want to point out is that these percentages on the cost escalation, these come from actual cost indexes that we track, whether it's the consumer price index or the employment cost index. We track long-term averages on those indexes. Some of them might look really low to you, and so it's a good to remind you that they actually come from actual sources. So you're beginning to notice a pattern here. The capital needs for sewer, like the other two utilities, are pretty front-end loaded. This is not because we don't think there will be projects in the future. It's just because we know what the capital plan is really early on. So we have $7.5 million in projects in the next 5 years, and we have modeled, as we did earlier for water, a revenue bond, in this case $1.7 million in fiscal year 23 to fund the capital plan. Okay, so this is our first appearance of a dotted line. So in all other respects, this graph works the same way as the two that Zach showed you before. You have the operating costs and then different layers of costs, including debt service, which is important in the sewer fund. The solid line is revenue at current rates, meaning this line is still going up, but it's going up because of customer growth, not because of price increases. So we are recommending 3 years of 12% rate increases to get you up on the slope where you need to essentially pay for the debt service on the borrowing that you will need, and also to have money available for the small amounts of capital in the out years. You'll notice that as early as fiscal year 2022, your revenues under current rates would not be sufficient even to pay existing debt service. So there is some manner of urgency to these rate increases, but 3 years of 12% will get you where you need to be for sewer. Fund balance, very similar pattern as you've seen before. We kind of got a pinch point down here. You're still above your minimums. The fund balance begins to grow. As before, we don't believe this is actually what it's going to look like, but that's consistent with the capital plan not being fully fleshed out for the out years. So this is the first time we have to actually show you some rates, because we're recommending something other than what you already have. So based upon rate increases being implemented at the beginning of each fiscal year, on the left side you will see your existing rates, and there is another panel of these on the next slide. So this isn't everything. But your 12% increases in the second, third, and fourth columns, and then in the fifth column, no further increases are needed, and so the fifth column looks a lot like the fourth column. But these are the inside cities, both base and volume, and then the system improvement fee, which gets the same percentage increase as everything else. So when we say 12% rate increase, it's 12% across the entire rate schedule. So this will slightly bump up your relative position from 53.69 for your current 5,000 gallon sample bill, up to $60.13 after the first increase. So slightly bump, but it's still kind of middle of the pack. So that is the end of the revenue requirement analysis for sewer, and you can stop there. There is no legal compulsion to go any further than that, but there is sort of a bonus round called a cost of service analysis. Now, the cost of service analysis is a way of looking at different customer classes to make sure not just that you get your revenue requirement met for the whole utility, but also are the individual customer classes paying their fair share. And to get at that question, we do two series of allocations of the revenue requirement being for each year the amount of cost that needs to be recovered in rates. Well, we take one of those years and we do two allocations. The first allocation is by function. So we actually look line by line in your budget. We look at the money you're going to spend on capital and the money you're going to spend on debt service, and we allocate it out to the four functions of sewer: the customer function, the flow function, the BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, which is one of the measures of sewage, of the strength of sewage, and TSS, which is total suspended solids, also another measure of the strength of sewage. We allocate costs to these four functions, and so you end up with a total rate requirement being allocated to those functions. And then we ask, how does each customer class use each of those functions? And so individually, we take each of these buckets and we allocate them to customer classes to determine how they should be recovering costs. Well, we're still in the process of refining those results and seeing if the city wants to take it further, but we do have sort of an early picture that is developing that we're happy to share with you. So in the upper left pie chart is the breakdown of rate revenue that the city is currently collecting from its sewer customer classes. So for example, today, based on today's rates, residential customers are paying 69% of the total rate revenue. Commercial is paying 26%. If we go through this scientific process of allocating costs to functions and then to customer classes, what the analysis tells us is that residential should not be paying 69% of the pie, but only 56% of the pie. And commercial, that is only paying 26% of the pie now, should be paying 41% of the pie. So these are the shifts that are kind of currently indicated by the cost of service analysis, but we are continuing to collaborate with city staff in seeing how we can refine this and whether we want to take this forward. You should know that there is no legal compulsion to adopt cost of service rates. We like cost of service rates, and we certainly do recommend them because they do represent an equitable allocation of costs to the customer classes based upon the burden that they represent to the utility. Also, it's a risk management strategy to make sure that should there be any major shifts in your customer base, it's good to know that at least your customers are being charged what they need to be based upon their usage characteristics, and so you're hedged a little bit from the risk of a change in the customer base. So there are all kinds of options you can explore when you do a cost of service analysis and also design your rates. One idea that we are doing a lot of work on these days are extra strength surcharges. This helps to equitably allocate the cost of really high strength flows and make sure that it's being paid for really by the institutions, the customers that are creating that high strength. And so this is an example of something that you can do when you do the cost of service analysis to its logical conclusion. But again, we're still collaborating with city staff to see how far we want to go with that. And that is our presentation for you this evening. We would be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Mr. Fleck.
Well, thank you, but maybe you could back up a couple slides, right? Nope, one more forward. Yes, right there. I guess you are leaving out some huge pieces of information, you know, you say that residential 69% and commercial is 26, but what are the number of users? I mean, we're missing some huge pieces of the puzzle here. So as an example, the agency I run, Community Sharing Program, our water, wastewater, and storm bill each month is between $335 and $350 a month. And we have 6 bathrooms. Okay, so I'm just trying to understand, you know, you said there's, and I trust, because I've talked with John over the years many times about, you know, these things. I know the details are there, we're just not getting them. Because
Oh, sure. That's right.
on first blush, I'm not seeing what you're saying to me. All I'm seeing is that a burden that's on our commercial ratepayers right now is going to be increased, and I'm not seeing any justification for that. And then I guess the part 2 of my question is, so it looks like storm is actually in a surplus, and I'm wondering if a reduction in storm fees is appropriate, because of that bill of mine, most of it is because of our parking lot and impervious surface. And so when you mentioned your residential ratepayers rates, that is just a fraction of what a business with a big parking lot is paying. So those are my 2 big questions at the moment.
Okay, so you're on your first question. Your observation is absolutely accurate. We have not brought you the same level of detail that we would if we were coming to ask you to take action on this. It's really only the revenue requirement that we have presented in sufficient detail for you to take that kind of action. We're giving you a taste of what the analysis is currently hinting at. But this is not meant to say just trust us. We're not saying that at all. If it's decided that this is something that the city wants to pursue, we will come back and we will show the work. So let's talk about storm.
Doug, sorry, could I add one thing?
Absolutely.
What we're not showing, there are steps in between where we very carefully allocate costs among those functions: flow, BOD, TS, you know, treatment of strength, and then we look at who. Well, we're trying to estimate strength of effluent, and by those parameters, commercial is generating as a class. This is commercial and industrial. Higher strength effluent, and that has to be treated, you know, that requires more treatment at the plant, and so they should pay a greater portion of those costs. And we'll show you that math, but that doesn't mean that every commercial customer should be paying more. In fact, that's where the strength distinctions, we're beginning to segregate among low, medium, and high strength effluent, relieves pressure on general office type uses and things that don't have high strength effluent. You know, high strength effluent is breweries, can be restaurants at times. Those are higher strength customers. And so that's why when we first started talking about this study, Ron was talking about the necessity of beginning to look at that in the rates, those distinctions among the commercial effluent strengths and commercial land uses. We just haven't got that far yet. And the bigger question is the immediate 12% increase that's needed in order to meet expenses, including debt service to come. So that's hopefully helpful additional information, but it's not the whole answer, I know.
Thanks, John. So let's talk about stormwater. Given that your fund balance sort of never drops below 2 million, and then as early as 2024 it seems to start going up, It's your question is obviously not crazy, because things look pretty healthy here, don't they? So let me give you a couple of reasons to be cautious. First of all, the capital needs are not articulated beyond just a few years, and I think you'd want to see a fuller picture of what the capital plan is beyond the initial period before you make a decision like that. Perhaps even more compelling than that is back to the assumptions that have gone by you 3 times, and now might be a little boring, but I just want to direct your attention to some of these numbers. Customer growth rate of less than 1%. This is the amount of revenue growth you will get if you don't raise rates. Whereas you have annual cost inflation, depending upon the line item, between 1.5% and 3%. And so the forces are there that the cost will ultimately overtake the revenue. It's just a question of over what period. And so for the most part, we are typically not enthusiastic about rate cuts because they just hasten the need for the eventual rate increase that will have to come later. We prefer to advise clients to at the very least hold things steady, because in a steady system with perfect knowledge and perfect forecasting and perfect planning and perfect behavior, costs would go up a little bit every year and rates would go up a little bit every year, consistent with inflation. And so that is the baseline. That is the mean to which we are always regressing. So for that reason, we're typically not fans of a rate cut. I'm interested if you find that persuasive. That was a big no.
I'm just being honest. I really appreciate you guys. And John, you've been so patient with me over the years. I do want to thank you for that, because I do ask some kind of tough questions. And I am looking at it from the ratepayer standpoint as well.
Yes.
We are the citizens advocates on this board, and we do need to look at what is fiscally responsible, but also we need to look at a balance of what can the ratepayer, in this case, our constituents, be able to, afford as well. I just know that our storm fee absolutely is just staggering. And if our balances are that good and we're talking about a 12% across the board or, even a heavier weight on commercial, I think that maybe an adjustment, might be worth looking into. But I thought we did capital improvement plans over a longer period. It seemed to me it was at least 10 years is what I remember in the past. And I see Richard raising his hand. Maybe he can answer that.
Just to kind of give you a little bit more perspective of what happens on that chart as it goes up. The 1.7 is what's in the 5 years, but we have a total of $15 million in stormwater that needs to occur. And that's what's in our capital improvement. So we're only planning the 1.7 in that 5-year period going on, but you've got another 14 million to still happen. We've done 753 this year with the safe routes to school and the stormwater project out there by the middle school. So we whittle off 750 of that. You still got 13 million to go, and that's what we need that reserve for, so we don't have to go out and borrow and cost more money. That's I think where we're working toward.
So we're really only showing you part of the story here. And if I may, the one thing I was going to suggest too is, let's say that additional 14 million wasn't there. I think what we would suggest is wait a couple of years before and see what else might be needed before you would act now based on that long-term forecast. But Richard's explanation was a lot better than that.
Mr. Irvin, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. It's looking at this, it's the projects coming up that are really what we are talking about trying to raise funds for, to be able to cover. And you know, this is the topic that, at least from what I'm paying attention to, this and roads are what people are most up in arms about, the rates being paid. And so those slides talking about our comparative position in the different, with the different storm, sewer, water, that's of keen interest, as well as the projects. So I'd like to hear more about why we are where we are comparatively in the different funds. We are towards the top. I have some ideas about why we are in relation to Eugene, where you've got a dispersed customer base on a common utility, and they're selling water, and so you have economies of scale at play. But maybe when people are saying we're so much higher than everybody else, is that because we have better infrastructure? Is that because we have a better forward planning and we're not going to get in trouble like other places will? So our place is lower on the list at real risk, and maybe that should be the, you know, should be known that we're paying for stability or not. And then to speak to those, I think it's probably a dovetail into the other topic, which is, what are these projects that people are about to pre-fund, and why are they important?
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, if we've got them listed in our budget. I mean, if you go to your budget document, you have the long pages that have the list of all those projects that are included in the capital project, and they're all listed there. We could read through them tonight if you wanted, but I mean, they're in the budget documents for those. It's easy to look at, and you look at the larger cities. Yeah, they do have an economy of scale. I mean, Coburg, if you go to the sewer rates for Coburg, they just built a whole new sewer system that is brand new. And to build a sewer system for a population of 1,100 cost them the same amount it cost us to build our sewer plant. And I mean, that's the way it works. I mean, you spend $9 million to build a sewer plant, and it will handle this much volume. When Eugene needs to build it to handle 2 or 3 times the amount, or 4 times the amount of us, it doesn't go up by that multiple, because the economies of scale are really significant. The other thing that you can say is, yeah, we have been proactive in identifying these programs and these projects and trying to address some of these failures. If you go back to the stormwater chart and look at the cities that don't have stormwater, what are they going to do? How are they addressing stormwater in their community, and where is that going to hit them someday? I mean, we're trying to make sure that we're not kicking the can down the road, which has happened to us. I mean, that's one of the reasons we've got some of this, is it's been kicked down the can. The can has been kicked down the road and said, hey, we don't need to do this. We can give everybody a break on the water rates right now because we're fine this year. Yeah, but what about the projects that are coming up? And roads are a great example. Having to make up for years and years of stuff that hasn't happened, you can't do it all of a sudden. You've got to have the plan. And what's wonderful is we've been doing this now with these plans for 15 years. I think at the end of this year, I think we've done 3 years with FCS, 3 5-year plans, I think now with FCS, and we're seeing the results. I mean, water and stormwater are actually paying for projects out of their reserve and accomplishing things and moving those things off the list as we get them done. We were struggling for years before trying to get that done, and we're still a little struggling in sewer, but I think we're getting there as we get a handle on that. So those are, yeah, we can go back and look at some of what, you know, these other communities are spending on some of their projects. Some of the cities may be newer cities too, that, you know, they have newer infrastructure that they're not spending. They're creating a problem. They're kicking it down the road a little bit, but we've got to catch up. And I think the key is that, yeah, we have them in the budget. And that's one of the things we wanted to make sure people saw is, we have $12 million in sewer projects and we're not doing the 12 million. We can't do them all in 1 year. We cannot do them in 1 year with our staff and even contracting it out. I mean, our staff is struggling to keep up with the contractor and manage the contract for the safe routes to schools with the multitude of everything that's there, water, sewer, storm, everything that's happening with that project. And that's a $4 million project. So yeah, we have to do it down the road and look to the future. Comparing, it's really nice to look at the chart and the table there where it shows where we're at and the rates, but you're exactly right. There are stories behind all of those numbers, why they're zeros, why they're 259, why Eugene's 15, and why we're 1247. But I think we need to look and focus on what we want to do. Do we want to be 1247? If we don't want to be that, then what are we going to take off the chart? And what are we going to take care of and push off even further so that we're not, maybe we'll just say, hey, that street can flood when it rains, and those people can have water running under their house because their stormwater can't handle it. And they can do it an extra 2 years rather than trying to get them on the chart. That's.
Mr. Stewart?
I'd just like to add that another component that may not be on people's radars is that the city of Cottage Grove, when it passed the 10,000 in population, now has a heavier burden of things that we have to do regarding stormwater that, somebody like Crestwell, Junction City, Coburg, Veneta, and Harrisburg don't, because they're well under 10,000 people in population. We are having to implement storm water filtration systems and things on all new projects and upgrading our systems that some of these other small cities don't have to do. So that's another component where, previous commissions or city councils have knew that was coming and were preparing for what we're doing. And as the city manager Myers said, this year we took on a probably our largest stormwater project in this 4th Street. It was the Fillmore upgrade, and it wasn't quite $1 million, but it was a pretty good sized project, and it was probably the largest one we've done that I'm aware of in recent times.
Mr. Mayor, can I inject something?
Yes, Mr. Brasby.
The other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug and John, but just to reiterate what they've presented, there is no increase in the water and the stormwater rates, is what they have shown. So again, outside of Councilor Fleck's example, we're not recommending any rate increases in water and stormwater over the next 5 years. That's zero. They've voiced their concern about sanitary sewer only, and they've given you in their model that we need to raise rates 12% in 3 consecutive years. So they're all valid questions each counselor has, and we can answer those, but I just want to remind you what they presented is, zero for stormwater, zero for water for 5 years. We haven't done that. Like water used to be 1.8. Storm drainage has been 7.9 for many years. So, to not raise your rates because of inflation, I think, as Mr. Myers has commented, we've done well in doing that. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Mr. Stinnett, you had a question?
Did I see correctly that we're looking at capital or bonds to raise capital for water and stormwater in 2023? Is that correct? Are those 1 bond, 2 bonds? Okay.
So this is for water. This is one issuance in fiscal 2023 of $1.3 million.
Okay.
And then for storm, there's no new debt service involved there. And then for
Okay.
sewer, it's 1.7 million in 2023.
Okay. And those are bonds that would need to be funded by the voters?
No, sir.
Approved by the voters?
This is, well, now that's an interesting idea. I will tell you that the initial the default assumption for all of these bonds, as we're modeling them, the default assumption is that these are revenue bonds. So these are bonds that are backed by the revenues of the utility, which is kind of the normal way to do it. They do, however, come with requirements that are important, and one of the most important requirements is debt service coverage. So you are required to earn a certain amount of revenue over and above your operating expenses and your debt service, which is usually not a problem if you're funding some of your capital program with rate money, because that rate money is a good way to use some of that extra coverage. But if everything is debt funded, then getting coverage can be a problem. However, there are other ways to bond other than that default assumption. One of them is something called full faith and credit, which is a way of borrowing without having debt service coverage, except that you're now pledging the full faith and credit of the city. It's not just limited to the revenue streams of your utilities. So the city is putting itself at a tiny bit more risk. It's not huge, but a lot of cities think that full faith and credit bonds are a worthwhile thing to do to avoid debt service coverage requirements. Now, the thing that you mentioned was voter approved. Now, that's something that's often goes by the name general obligation bonds in Oregon. But those are bonds that if they're voted on, what the voter is actually voting on is typically a debt service levy that goes on the property tax, which is something that you could do for utilities if you wanted to. It's not typically done, but in one case, this was done in Clackamas County by Oak Lodge Sanitary District. While it was still a district by itself, it's now combined. They went out for a voter approved bond, but then used their sewer revenues to pay the bond back and never had to certify the debt service to the tax rolls. That's the only time I've ever heard of that happening before. But to your point, there are options for how you do it, and what we have assumed here are kind of plain vanilla revenue bonds with debt service coverage requirements.
Okay. It just seems like anything that's going to go before the citizens of Cottage Grove that's going to ask them for a water rate increase is pretty much a non-starter, and I think just about everybody could agree with that here. It is really hard. I think people are going to light up even tonight, tomorrow, with the news that we're considering any type of increase. This is a good explanation of where we are, but it doesn't fly with the general public. I don't know how we sell this. I don't know how we get the word out, especially as a resident. If I were told that my sewer rates were going to increase for the next 3 years, but if I were also told simultaneously that the commercial accounts in this city should be paying a higher share, those two things would set me off, honestly. And I guess I wonder how we, as representatives of the citizens and businesses in Cottage Grove, present this to people in a way that people can live with.
Mr. Fleck?
So the downside, Councilor Stinnett, is that we've had to do this. I mean, our current rate structure is because we recognize that the pipes under the ground, were 50 and 60 years old and had a 35-year lifespan. And so, as Richard was mentioning earlier, and maybe it's time to Richard to do another presentation on. I don't remember what that video was you had, but it was about the ticking time bomb under city streets. The problem is we've had, what is it, 3 or 4 now mains blow up under streets where it's actually destroyed big sections of streets, just for that very reason. So, part of our rate is driven by the fact that we've had to do a new wastewater plant, a new water plant. I mean, that was what, over $20 million of debt service right there, over 3,600 ratepayers, or now probably 37. So, that's the biggest piece. But the other thing is these capital improvement projects. If we don't keep replacing those oldest pipes under the ground, we're going to end up with more troubles than if we just sit on it. It's going to cost us more because it's also going to damage other infrastructure, and it's going to damage private property. And so we have to do it, and that's what we tell the citizens. It's a tough pill to swallow, and as that commercial customer, I get it. Let me tell you, a nonprofit with a $350 a month water bill, I mean, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. And I get it from the residential side at $100 a month for all of them. But if we don't do it, that's the message that we have to tell, is we're trying to keep those costs as low as we can while being a responsible utility and maintaining that infrastructure at least to those minimum levels. And that's the point, I guess I would say, that we have to make. There's just not a choice. Thank you.
Mr. Myers?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that the bond that we're doing for water is going to be paid by the existing rates. There's no rate increase for that bond, and that's a success that we've seen. And I think that's something that we have to say, hey, here's what we're able to do now. We have to bond because the project's going to be expensive and we can't pay for it over 3 years because the contractor wants paid as soon as they're done. So we have to bond it so we can pay them, and then we can pay that off. Are we there yet with sewer? No, and that's the challenge. And it is, I mean, we do have to, and this is one of the other pieces, we have to be careful on how we describe the utilities. The bill is not water. There's drinking water, there's stormwater, and there's sewer. And we've got to realize some of these cities don't even do a portion of that yet. I mean, some of the small cities don't even touch stormwater yet, but they're going to have to someday. And some of them don't do sewer. I mean, your Gene water bills, they're under the metropolitan waste, and so often that gets separated out, and people don't even know that that's part of their bill as well, and compare that way. So it is a challenge, and how do we get that message out? How do we show that? And we want to, I mean, that's why we put this stuff in the budget. Here's all the projects that are out there and why we need to do these. You've got $22 million worth of projects in water, and we're comfortable with what's going on. And so, I mean, there's, you look at what happens in other communities. Look at what's going on in Texas. Look what happened in Oregon with some of the plants that were not able to continue to operate with the weather, and just a weather issue happened. But what was it? 2 weeks ago, we just had a 6-inch water line split, a 10-inch split along the top of the water pipe, and that's the kind of stuff that happens. And are we going to catch them all? No, we're going to still have stuff fail, but we've got to be moving in a way where we're progressively addressing some of these. A couple of the big ones are the new reservoirs that we need to do. I mean, that's huge for us when we only have 4.2 million gallons of storage. It's 4.2, right, Faye? Yeah, and we need more storage as we're continuing to grow, and we see that need during high flow times during the summer and everything. And those are $1.5 million each. That's stuff that has to happen, and if it doesn't, we can't. Somebody's going to have to pay for it, and then all of a sudden the rates are really going to have to go up. So yeah, it's the old oil filter commercial.
Pay me
Where
now.
the mechanic says, pay me now or pay me later. And it's a lot more later. So, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Stinnett first, then Mr. Urban.
I would say that I get it personally. This is not my first presentation from the FCS group. I understood it 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't think a lot of people in this town have the stomach and the head for it. I get that it has to happen. I don't know how we get it across, but I think it should be part of the process. Telling people why. This is probably the most impact we have on our constituents, on the citizens of Cottage Grove, on the businesses in Cottage Grove, I think, unless it has something to do with police or we have to figure out a way to make this make sense to people, especially in a time of hardship and uncertainty. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you. I know we have a lot of people on tonight, and I am just really curious, having gone through this presentation, what some of the responses are, because a lot of these people are the ones that, you know, are sending information out to the rest and getting people's awareness up. So I think part of that responsibility falls on everyone else. And if there's any questions about or disagreements, that this would be an excellent time to hear them.
Anyone from the audience wish to ask a question or comment?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Dwayne Caddy, 1803 West Main Street. I feel like Greg is talking about me. I shared this we talked on the radio this morning. We spoke with Mr. Myers on the radio this morning for quite some time. We went a half hour over, and we were told that some folks might experience a 0% increase, while some might experience a 37% increase. And now I'm hearing that it's 12. It could be 12% across the board. And then I'm seeing numbers that are saying that myself, the resident, is paying more than my fair share, according to the cost sharing analysis that this group put together. Yeah, I am sharing this with folks, and I'm doing that because I feel like the constituents are not getting this information. I would disagree with breaking it down, and I'll tell you why if you want to hear. If people hear that they're paying $100 a month for water, there's a value in water, right? And there's not a value in stormwater. There's not a value in wastewater to the consumer, right? You're selling them the water, and they pee it out, or they stick it on the grass, and they really don't care what happens to it afterwards. Some people do. Most people don't. So if you break it down and say, hey, look, you're still paying the same amount for water, you're still paying the same amount for stormwater, but you're paying more for wastewater, they're going to throw a fit. I mean, I could almost justify a 12% increase in water because you got to have water to live. But I'll just start, if you waive my wastewater fee, I'll just start throwing the stuff. I'll run a gray water tube out to my garden, right? And build an illegal septic system in my yard. And you catch my drift. I don't think if you took this to the taxpayers, I don't think you'd get the support no matter what. I'm on board with Stinnett. But I think that the communication with the residents is lacking. One thing you guys have to remember, that if you do make it 37% for Chevron because they have the showers, and you make it 37% for Walmart because they have the restrooms, and 37% for the brewery because they use a lot of water to make their beer, then you have to remember that all of that eventually falls back on the consumer. So at the end of the day, I'm still paying an increase. So if you got some questions for me, I'll answer them. I'll do it now. I'll do it on Facebook later. I'll do it via telephone or email. That's my 2 cents on the issue. Thanks for allowing me to speak, Mr. Irvin, Mr. Mayor.
Well, yeah, I wanted to mention that's exactly what I think we need to hear. That's the conversation that, like, FCS group needs to hear, from this town. It's a lot of people are wanting to be in control of their costs, and I totally agree that you know, if you're trying to figure out where to save money, and that's something I would do. I would reroute and like cut my sewer bill off. I'll figure out another way, you know? And so, yeah, I just thank you, Dwayne, and we would love to hear more.
I'd like to speak.
Yes.
Karen Munsell, PO Box 174, Cottage Grove. So I've listened to this, and we actually did have a bit of this live on Facebook, and there's a lot. There is a lot, and part of the issue that flows across town is there's not enough discussion with the community, and this stuff comes out, and I know you guys have been talking about it. We hear about some of it, and as much as meetings and stuff as we can jump into, but there's a lot of people that part of the discussions on Facebook and stuff is we're trying to teach people this part of your civic duty as a citizen, you know, as citizens. And so in doing that, it's interesting that people are wanting to learn. So, you know, I ask our council and our city to think about that a little bit. Think about some ways that, like you're doing with the yak. Some of that has to happen with the adults as well, unfortunately, but it does. On the costs, I agree with the tone of the community of how I feel they're gonna see this and hear this and react to this, because we have a lot of people in our community that are hurting badly. And this, at a time like this, you know, we're in a pandemic, and for some of us, we're doing okay. We're cruising along. That's not happening for a lot of people in our city and our outlying community that this doesn't affect, but it's heavy. And so it's all part of the conversation, and that's just what I'm speaking to. At this point, it's a lot of money. And it's a lot for people who are suffering badly in a pandemic to even have the conversation, but we did find several people willing and wanting to. So I just wanted to speak to that a little bit. I don't have any criticism. I think it's just a time of where we're at in our society. And, you know, maybe this is a good topic for our community to learn something. I'd be willing to try and be a softer part of that communication in the parts of the community that I'm around in. But I have to feel like my council and my city wants to share that with me, and I don't always feel that way. So, and that's something we could discuss. I'd be happy to discuss it another time, because I think it's important to get people in and get people active that are seeming to want to be. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Anyone
Mr. Mayor,
else?
if I may.
Yes.
This is Jake Boone, 823 Birch Avenue, Cottage Grove. I wasn't going to talk today, but now I am. Hi. So as a private citizen with, at this point, no connection to the Cottage Grove City Council, except having once been on it, I am maybe not your random sample of citizenry, but I understand this and I understand why it's important. And yes, I think most folks don't necessarily put a lot of thought into the fact that, you know, they see the clean water come out of the tap when they turn it on. They know that's happening. They appreciate that. The stuff that happens after they flush the toilet, they don't maybe know how much they appreciate it, but they very much appreciate it, because we don't have cholera outbreaks in Cottage Grove. And I think that's a really important selling point for this. We want to continue not having cholera outbreaks in Cottage Grove. As a citizen myself, I think that's important. That's one of the reasons I am I'm not going to say happy to send money off for utilities every month, because who's happy to do that exactly, but perfectly willing to do so. And looking at these numbers, this is 12% sounds big, but for your average residential customer, it looks like it's going to be adding $3 or $4 a month. Is that correct?
I think it's 7. Yeah.
Oh, 7 a month.
With all
Okay.
of the sewer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think that's worthwhile. That's a worthwhile investment in our not having cholera future. So I think the key to, there are some people who are going to get news straight from the horse's mouth and will understand. There are going to be people who are determined not to understand no matter how much information they get. But I think most of the folks are somewhere in between there. They may not know right away why it's important, but it's not that hard to get them to understand if you just explain, this is what it actually costs to do these things here in Cottage Grove. I think that's the only success I ever had when I was on the council doing that, was just explaining this is what it actually costs. We have to cover those costs, or we don't get to have the things that we're paying for. You don't want to pay for roads, of course you don't get good roads. You don't want to pay for sewer, of course you don't get good sewer treatment. That's how you've got to do it. And I, for one, am perfectly fine with these rates going up, because I want the sewer to continue working on into the future, not just while I'm screaming about it right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Stanek?
Please help us sell it, Jake. I get that you get it, but not a lot of people do. So any help we can get, I'm committed to it.
I just want to tell the council, I think this is a good topic to have at our goal setting session, as how to do an outreach.
Absolutely.
Mr. Myers?
Yeah,
I'm having trouble seeing everybody because I got little tiny dots up here, so it's hard.
Oh yeah, because I separated mine out so I could see the PowerPoint and the pictures separately, and you can't. Yeah, and I think goal setting is a great spot, and I just want to kind of give the council, think of some ideas. What do you need from us as staff for you to be able to sell this and to talk about it, and to talk about it well with people? Because you're the elected officials, and that's a lot of pressure on you. You've got a regular life, you got regular jobs, you got other things to do, and you've got the burden of helping people understand this. To give a good example, former mayor had us print up the sheets and the list of showing us the condition of roads, or showing us the condition and age of pipes, and he had them in his vehicle. So wherever he went, when somebody asked and told him that the rates were too high, he pulled these things out, and they were laminated, and we did it for him. And he sat down and said, here's what we've got, and here's the stuff we're trying to work toward doing. So if you can think of anything that you need from us to help you sell, we'll do it. So think of those. That's kind of a homework assignment for you for the goal setting. What do you need to help to pitch this out and let that out? And what other things do we need to try to get out? And I think that's what we're working on too, and trying to experiment and see what can we do to get the message out. But I live here in the community too, and I get the message out or say it, and people won't believe it. If you guys go out and say it, they'll believe it much more.
We got our direction on this then?
I guess there is one question, and this is something we can talk about in the goal setting too. We wanted you to just kind of get a 150,000 foot high evaluation of the cost of analysis. Do you want more detail? Do you want us to sit down with FCS and look at that commercial and start breaking those out? Because there's a furniture store on Main Street with one bathroom and a sink in it. Should they be in a category with businesses that have a higher load? There's businesses that basically just have a bathroom or bathrooms, and they're just like a residence. Do we want to go through the extra detail and and put together something on the cost analysis, the cost of service, or do you want to continue down the road and look at that for some future date longer away? And I wouldn't recommend doing that for July, because there's a lot of work to do before July 1. I don't know if FCS if that could be done by July 1 or not and be adopted. But if you do want to look at that, let us know and we'll keep moving forward in that. Otherwise, we'll move forward with what we've got set up.
Mr. Irvin?
Yeah, I don't know if it needs to come in the form of a recommendation or not, but I guess I'd recommend that if we are considering moving to this shift in how we allocate costs, that we do have more of an analysis, more information to go on, having it broken out by, what the intent of the shift is to allocate costs more correctly based on usage. So having more insight into that would be good. Just briefly to address the point about how you can help the council, I speak for myself, and more information available to present at our fingertips is better. I know that should come up on a goal seeking, but I think we're battling two different things. One is just a general lack of trust from the community, and that might be spawning from what seems like a lack of transparency. So more information up front, even if it doesn't look like it's being consumed, I think can help negate the claims that there isn't transparency. So anything that comes along with this, even if it's a presentation, that could be shown, that would be on the website, they'd be accessible via an app or even a packet that explains and tells the story of the different cities and how we are in relation, because everybody, looks at their neighbors to see if they're on track, in terms of different cities, like where are we, why are we doing what we're doing? Is there fraud going on here or something? That's, I think, the suspicions that come up. Is there impropriety? So anything along those lines would really, really help. And I guess that's it.
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, Dwayne Tag, can I add one thing real fast?
Yeah, make it quick.
Make it quick. One thing we got to do is we got to ask ourselves how we got here, and we've got to make sure that I was going to say something else, but I forgot what it was. But we got to ask ourselves how we got here, and then get it out to the people. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we will move on then to item C, the safe routes to school and Fillmore stormwater outfall project change order approval. Mr. Bradsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm coming back to City Council to get approval on, again, items that were not in the original contract of the safe routes to school. We have two items tonight. One is there was a water main break at 6th and Taylor. The contractor, when the pipes pulled apart, the contractor was there and used their equipment to help the city crew in digging, and they also provided CDF, which stands for Controlled Density Fill, where the street was undermined during the break. That cost us $2,429.96. We have been working with all utilities, Pacific Power, Charter Communications, and CenturyLink, with the new improvements, and we've tried to meet our policy about even going underground. Some of their utilities or infrastructure needed to move due to placement of handicap ramps. They needed to be moved, and we evaluated different options, and we chose a major removal of, I think we're getting rid of 4 or 5 poles on the project and going underground, and to install the vault and the conduits and the sweep and the pull string. The contractor charged $93,438. So again, these are non-items that were not specified in the original scope. Those options were not, the utility companies, even though they were notified, did not really begin to look at the project until the project started. So they didn't provide a lot of input to do that. So I'm asking for approval of $95,868.70. We've adjusted the expenditures to the budget numbers that we presented. You can still see that we are under the budgeted amount, but the project did originally bid at $3.487 million. Any other questions that you might have that I can answer tonight?
Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ron, is it normal practice for us to pay for stuff for service providers like Pacific Power, Charter, and CenturyLink? Do they not pitch in on that?
They're due to some of the things are outlined in the franchise agreement. Yes, they do pitch in some. Some of the, like for instance, the Pacific Power they would do it in is what I'm going to call it, Councilman Roberts. If it's overhead power and we tell them to move overhead power, that's at their cost. But since we went a step further and we asked to go underground, that became our cost. So it wasn't, so it wasn't in situations. So we ended up purchasing, I guess the contractor to put in conduit and stuff like that. So that's suggestion for future franchise agreements revisions. Possibly, if we require them to go underground, then they pay their cost.
Yeah, I would think so. For me.
Mr. Myers?
Okay.
Yeah, and you won't get that in a franchise agreement, and the PUC will even fight that you cannot force them to go underground for a project that you're doing that they could do overhead, that they were overhead. You'd be paying for that. That's just we're over the barrel. I mean, that's what happens with us when we do that. Yeah, I mean, if they stay with the bear what they are required to do under the NEC and the franchise agreements and what PUC says for all three of those utilities, then they pay for it. But anything above and beyond that's even better than their bare essential, then we have to. So yeah. Northwest Natural, similar thing there. If theirs is all underground, but if we made them move because we wanted to put some other infrastructure into place that worked for us, they'd still have to have us. We'd have to pay.
Yeah. Just a little correction. We got Northwest Natural plans out. They were one of the very responsive utilities. They did move all their utilities at their cost to avoid any conflicts in our underground infrastructure on this project.
Do you have another question, Mr. Roberts?
Well, I'm just confused why we're using tax money so that people like Charter and CenturyLink can put their lines in, and then they've got a certain amount of people probably in this community that don't use that service. I don't know. I'm confused.
Mr. Fleck?
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approves change order number 8 for the total of $95,868.70.
Mayor, does anybody from the audience get to speak on this issue?
I'm waiting to see if I get a second first.
Okay, I'll wait.
I'll second.
I'll second.
Okay, I got a motion with the second. Now I'll take
comments from the audience.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Dwayne Caddy, 1803 West Main Street, Cottage Grove, Oregon. You put this information out, Mr. Myers, on Friday, and I did some research. And I found Section 9 of the franchise agreement that is on the city's website. I have no reason to believe that it's outdated. Section 9 is titled Relocation of Electric Facilities. 9.1 says, the city reserves the right to require Pacific Corp to relocate overhead electric facilities within the public ways of, in the interest of, this is important, in the interest of public convenience, necessity, health, safety, and welfare at no cost to the city. Within a reasonable time period after such written notice, Pacific Corp shall promptly commence the overhead relocation of its electrical facilities. Before requiring a relocation of electric facilities, the city shall, with the assistance of consent of Pacific Corp, identify a reasonable alignment for the relocated electric facilities within the public ways of the city. And then it says the city shall assign or otherwise transfer to the company all right it may have to recover costs for the relocation work and shall support the efforts of Pacific Corp to obtain reimbursement. And it talks about their rights to obtain reimbursement under PUC OAR. Then to further that, now we talk about the cable company. He's not muted. I can hear him breathing heavily. Appreciate if they'd mute their mic so I can keep speaking. Cable companies. In the franchise agreement with, well, there's no specific franchise agreement with any specific company. What there is a blanket franchise agreement for cable companies. And in 1.2, it says use of public, well, let's skip to 9.3 first. 9.3 is titled Undergrounding of Cable. Present and future undergrounding of cable is strongly encouraged. Cable shall be installed underground where all existing utilities already are underground. This is important here. Where all utilities are placed underground or where statutes or ordinance requires utilities be placed underground. Now, listen to this. Previously installed aerial cable shall be underground in concert and on a reasonable cost sharing basis with other utilities. Pursuant to the general ordinances of the city or applicable state law, or in the event the telephone and electricity utility decides to underground its facilities on a voluntary basis, unless the city council grants an exception. There's also 1.2 of the cable company franchise agreement that I won't read, but essentially it says that it will use the same culverts, or it uses the word goalie or whatever it uses. But I urge the city council to table this, go home, go to the city's website, cottagegrove.org, .gov, whatever it is, you guys know what it is, and search for franchise agreements, and you will find these franchise agreements, which tells you that we don't have to pay for this. So essentially, if those franchise agreements are still in place, and those are the agreements we signed with CenturyLink, Charter, and Pacific Power, then we are simply wasting almost $95,000 of our taxpayer money, and that would be irresponsible. Thank you.
Mr. Myers?
Yeah, and it was convenient that he skipped the last sentence in the Pacific Power one where it says, in cases of capital improvement projects, that's what this is, undertaken by the city, Pacific Corp shall convert existing overhead distribution facilities underground as so long as Pacific Corp is allowed to collect the costs associated with the conversion. That's what they're doing. And they're doing that consistent with the PUC regulations and everything, that they're doing that, and that's what they're allowed to do. We are doing all this at the same time. CenturyLink, Charter are going under, they're sharing, and that's what that means, is they cost share among the utilities to share poles, typically is what they do. Pacific Power usually charges them a rent for their poles, but they'll be going in the same ditch, in the same trench, or they won't put them in the same conduit because they can't. I mean, they have some restrictions on that. They can't put them in the same conduit, and they may have to space them out based on their requirements, but that's what they're doing. That doesn't say that we don't get to pay for it. It does say we do have to pay for it in doing that conversion.
Mr. Stewart?
Thank you. I think maybe it might be helpful to add just a little bit of context to the problem that we solved or working to solve at the corner of 4th and Taylor. At the corner of 4th and Taylor, there was a pole that had to move to meet ADA requirements for the sidewalks. Once we, myself and this, Ron, city engineer, and the various different staffs from each utility were on site looking, the challenge is that Charter had fiber that was on the pole. And to move the pole back to where the project it was recommended, it needed to shift further away by in excess of 8 feet from its current location to meet the ADA requirements for the project. The problem is that there wasn't 8 feet of fiber to slide the pole back 8 feet to the recommended location. Once we worked through it, the best recommendation that staff agreed to, and also the utilities, is that it was possible to underground these utilities in that area and not jeopardize the fiber, Charter's fiber link, and that CenturyLink didn't have any issues regarding it, and it worked for Pacific Power. There was also an additional pole. If folks would like to go out there and take a look, you can see these 2 poles right at Taylor and 4th Street. Right across the street from the pole that we had to underground is another pole very close to the street, and challenged the bus drivers, the school bus drivers, to make that corner. The folks that drive those flat-nosed school buses felt like they could reach right out and touch the power pole on the opposite side of the street. So what the project ended up doing was undergrounding power to, I believe, 4 residences in this project. It's taking 2 poles completely away, those 2 poles in question is completely away. And it was, yes, it's an expensive process, but it was really the only option that we had to meet federal ADA rules and what were the challenges that we had in trying to find a solution for this project. At this time, yes, because as Mr. Myers read out, because we requested that to be undergrounded, and it was the best solution for the project, that the cost of it is borne by the city. I would also point out that we strongly believe that this is a cost that the Safe Routes to Schools grant will cover, because it is an ADA issue, and we should get full reimbursement for these costs from the grant. So there's lots of information out there. It's not included in a memo, and I would be happy to explain this to anybody if they got further questions at greater detail.
Any more questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Thank you.
Mayor, Dwayne Caddy. Do I not get to speak before you? Well, I gotta just say there is more to that rule, and I'm appalled by every city councilor that voted in favor of this without taking into consideration what I said. If you look at that rule, the ORS Public Utility Commission Chapter 860, forced conversions of electric and communication facilities, they will tell you that that rule does not apply if the costs do not exceed 1% of the utility's annual revenues derived from customers residing within the boundaries of the local government. So there needs to be some math done. Each and every one of you that voted for this should be ashamed of yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, item D, COVID-19 assistance. Mr. Myers.
So I've held my meetings with several meetings with businesses. We did 4 of those, and we did 2 of those most recently, where we sat down. I met with Sean and I conducted those. We had probably about 12 different people throughout those 2 meetings, one in the morning and one in the evening, and talked about what's out there and what's available. How can we help businesses through everything that's going on with the pandemic? We discussed the proposal to do the liquor license. We talked about some of the other options and thoughts that we had, talking about how we could use some of the money that we had set aside for loans that hasn't been used and probably won't be used just because most of the businesses are already too far out and it's stretched out that they don't want to take another loan. We've had originally back in, trying to think when that was, July or August, when the council put the 100,000 set it aside for emergency loan program for businesses. We then in, I believe, October or something like that, we joined with Lane County and put $25,414 of that loan money into a match for grants from the state and federal government. As a result of doing that, and because some of the communities in the county couldn't participate or just didn't participate, our match changed from a dollar for dollar match to actually ending up with a total of $85,000. So we almost got $2 well, we did get $2 for every dollar we put in, and it exceeded that with a total of $85,000 that went out to 11 different businesses in the community. That left us $40,000 in our loan fund, just a little over that, or 74,000 in our loan fund, and 40 of that went out in grants. So four businesses got $10,000 grants through our loan fund, and what remains is about $30,000. After meeting with the businesses and talking with the businesses and the chamber and others, what I'd like to propose and for the council to consider and for us to move forward and do is to take 15,000 of that loan fund out of the community lending works and bring that back to the community and put it into the H2O program. And that would go then to community sharing for assistance with residential utility bills, specifically residential water, sewer, stormwater utility bills in Cottage Grove. And then the remaining funds would remain with Community Lending Works, and we'd convert that into basically a grant program to assist with businesses with the utilities, utility costs. We have a number of businesses that have that are small businesses and local small businesses in the community that have a large parcel of land or a big building, and their stormwater fee every month is $350 of their utility bill because they have a parking lot and they have a big building, and they were closed and they could not do any business at all. They were completely shut down. And so what I would suggest is that we do a two-tier approach on the remaining money, with the first tier being for those businesses that have been closed, and only a portion of that money would be available in this first tier, probably 60% or 70% of that first amount would be available for those businesses that were closed, that they would apply for assistance with their utilities for those periods of time when they were actually closed by order of the state. And then the second tier would be for businesses that were closed, restricted, or were impacted as a result of COVID-19. And all of this would be back to March 1st, 2020. So we'd be reimbursing for some costs that have been occurring or crediting their utility bill with that money, probably reimbursing. Then that works better with the Treasury Department if we do get an opportunity to have other funds come in. Along with that, that's the money that's in Community Lending Works. Along with that, tonight, what we'd like to have is for the council to move the starting date for the streeteries, because under our pilot project, we set the starting date for the streeteries as March 15th. We've applied for a grant through Travel Oregon, through their Destination Ready program, to put in the streeteries, and we've heard that we've got a good chance that it's a good grant application from people that are looking at it or have looked at it outside of our community. But there were lots of grants there. They were supposed to award that on the 11th, and they've pushed it back 2 weeks. And so of February, they were supposed to award that. So hopefully in the next week, they will actually come out and award those grants. What we would like to do is, as soon as that award comes out, if we get awarded, start those streeteries and start putting them in place. That way we get that moving a little faster. We can get them out into those locations and increase their footprint a little bit faster for some of those businesses. So that's something that we do need to have as well. I would also suggest in the proposal to waive the turn-on fee so that those businesses, and we have a few of them that we talked to and that were concerned about their utility bills, actually turned it off, shut off their water and sewer and storm, and just closed their account for a period of time while they were closed. We'd like to waive that $35 turn-on fee and turn that back on. In addition, the last point would be to waive the $25 liquor license fee for those on-premise sales licenses for businesses that were closed. And this would be the ones that actually had to close in the community. So it wouldn't affect Safeway or Walmart or the convenience stores or those businesses. It would just affect the ones that were closed and could not sell their on-premise alcohol as a result. So in July, when they do their new liquor license, or coming up in May and April, their new liquor license, they wouldn't have to pay the $25 Cottage Grove license fee. So that's as a result of the discussion, and we'll continue to do the other things we're doing that are more infrastructure and stuff that we've got. We've provided the canopies that we've had. Most of our canopies are very old. We've had them for 15 plus years. We did purchase some new ones to use in the warming shelter location, and we bought some extras so that we had those on hand. Those are pretty much all gone out. I think we have 2 left. 2 10 by 10s, and we're just continue to make those available for businesses that want to expand some of their seating. Hopefully tomorrow morning we'll hear that they'll be able to be inside, but it still will be at 25%. And so it's really important that they have that additional space for a number of those. And our curbside service and barricades and the signs that we're helping and putting up for people and doing that as well. And we'll continue to do that. So that's our package that we kind of put together as a result of meeting with businesses, and we'd just like to have the council kind of ratify that and by motion authorize us to move forward.
Mr. Fleck?
So I do not believe I have a conflict of interest here. Community sharing is where I am employed, but every dollar of the H2O program goes directly to the client. Our agency does not receive any sort of administrative fee for doing that. But I want to make that declaration just in the, I want to be completely transparent. But like I said, I don't believe I have a conflict of interest, but want to disclose it.
So do we have a motion on that? Mr. Irvin?
Comment first. I recall when we were first talking about the streeteries specifically, one of my thoughts was, well, let's open it up there as long as the businesses want to have it. And the concerns, as I recall from council, was that it was unsafe to open them up too early or too late. So I was just wondering if there's any change in opinion there.
Yeah, I don't know about the council, and we've looked at that as well, but we've designed, and 2 of the streeteries are designed and ready to go. All we need to get is the equipment. But and what we have done with the streeteries is we've designed them probably beyond what needs to be done or what is done in other communities. Portland, some of theirs are split rails sitting in a bucket with gravel, and they make a split rail fence that doesn't stop vehicles, but they're also not on a road that has logging trucks and other large vehicles. It's a street in downtown Portland that's off on one of the side streets. So I think we've created something that's going to be safer. Is it 100% foolproof that somebody's not going to drive through it or something like that? No, but they're much safer. They're not going to be able to push over or fall against and fall out into the street. And they will provide some protection from vehicular traffic. So I think one of the issues was, and this is something that we may want to consider later, but if we need to push the taking down time, which would be November, I think is what it was in the Streeteries pilot program, that would be something where we were concerned that as we moved into the rainy weather, snow, other things like that, that the Streeteries would definitely be in the way for cleaning the streets and getting drainage working right and removing snow or debris, leaves, that kind of stuff, because they'd be there. So I think that's where the safety came from. If I hope, I hope we don't have any snow or ice from now on. I mean, this is the week we got it back in 19. Wednesday will be the anniversary, but I'm not seeing that in the forecast, but who knows, that may happen. But typically we don't see it, after March comes. So.
Mr. Fleck?
Yeah, I thank you, Councilor Urban, because I do, still have my concerns around streeteries. That said, moving the time frame up, I mean, the council's approved it, and I'm certainly not going to belabor that every time the item comes before us. I will qualify that I don't think it's a great idea, but it has been approved. So I guess I'm generally supportive. And did we end up with a motion on this yet, Mr. Mayor?
No, we don't.
So I'll go ahead and move that the city council authorize the city manager to move forward with the programs described above to assist local small businesses and residences during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
And change the streetery dates?
Sure.
And that may not have to happen. I mean, it's probably going to be March 15th before we get anything actually being built in the streets, but just in case, it may be the 10th.
Okay, we have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right, concerns from council. Ms. Roberts.
Richard, I'd like to tell you about an experience I had coming back from the Cascade Mountains, doing some mountain climbing. I stopped in Oak Ridge at the brewery there. They have a tent system outside in front, much like we put up at the Axe and Fiddle, but it is made of a really durable, thick, clear plastic. And I felt that dining in that was way more enjoyable than being in the kind of tents that we've been setting up. The other thing I like about them is that you're able to see out. So if the one at the Axe and Fiddle was clear, you'd still be able to see the mural and all the things around you. And also, I think it'd be good at night for our police to be able to see if there's anybody hiding out in there. I know the Axe and Fiddle, I think somebody stole their lights while I was gone on vacation. So I just think that if we have to maybe buy more, if we do, how long COVID sticks, if we maybe look into that clear plastic. They put the heaters in there. It just was really nice. I didn't feel like I was enclosed in a closet. And the other thing I think about it that'd be good is when people driving by see all the people in there eating, it might make them want to come in there and eat. I just really like the attractiveness of that clear plastic over the white that we're using. So I was just wondering if maybe you could look into that if we're going to build any future tents.
We don't have any plan on buying any new ones. So yeah, I mean, that's what we had. We didn't.
The Oak Ridge, the three-headed goat or whatever the place is called, I forget. But they had the heaters, and it was raining when me and Sarah were there, but it was very nice. You could see the traffic and all the architecture of the other buildings. It actually felt a lot more, to me, comfortable than what we're currently using. For me, that's just for me. So I just thought it would be something I'd bring up, and maybe you could look into that. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Fleck?
So Richard, Mr. Tade's comments around Charter moving their office, I guess I didn't realize that they had closed their office in Cottage Grove. That was a long time piece of that franchise agreement. Yet I remember way back when they weren't following their franchise, and because of competition that things have changed. Where do you think we stand as far as that goes?
They sent us a notice in November that they were closing, and that's all it says, is they just have to provide us a notice, and they gave us a notice. I'm going to check and see if they sent that out to customers, because I don't know if they sent it out on customers. It may have been on the bottom of a bill somewhere and in an inconspicuous place, almost in invisible ink, but it probably was there. So that's what we need to check and see if they did send that out. Yeah, but we did get a notice on November 19th.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Irvin?
Yeah, I had someone to bring up some concerns about the upcoming interviews for filling the vacant position for Ward 1 in terms of the public participation in the process. And I think those concerns are probably founded in the same kind of the same place as some of the comments that were brought up earlier in the meeting about just this public outreach, availability of information, and so on. So I had a couple of thoughts on that. And I know we had a timeline. I guess one is in the form of a question. Are the applications that have been submitted going to be made available prior to walking into that interview process, made available to the counselors as well as to the general public? Another a thought is, how do we garner more public input so that we can hear in terms of even the questions? Can we invite questions from the constituents of Ward 1 to be entertained, that we could be asking? So those were the kind of two major thoughts surrounding this upcoming Ward 1 position. And then, I've been thinking about questions as well and writing them down. I guess I'm curious as to what the good channel for introducing those for. Part of my frustration with this whole council thing is our lack of ability to communicate with each other as a council. And that's why I stay off of Facebook and all these other things, but it really does hinder our ability to think. And I think free speech, one of the major benefits of it is it allows us to think, to have an idea and to have it, tested and everything. And so I guess I just voiced that I have a desire to be able to discuss more, to talk about ideas, to learn more from the council, but feeling limited in the opportunities to do so. So I guess we'll stop there for now.
Well, I'd just like to say that on that was, in the past, I don't remember the applications going out to the general public prior to. I think we seen them the night of the interview, that everybody had a copy of the applications. And the questions, we have a list of about 14 questions that we would pass out the night before, and the council would go through, because we don't want one person asking all 14 questions. So you'd say, I want to take this one, I want to take this one, I want to take this one. Then we go around the room in a round table robin and ask the questions at the meeting. And so we would take five minutes prior to the interviews and kind of go over how we were going to do that. Mr. Myers, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, the interviews are going to be a public meeting, and so we will have that agenda prepared, and that information will be out on the Wednesday before. That's how we've done it in the past, is when you do that interview process, that information is out. It's with the agenda, so the application and everything would be posted online and available, and it'd be public then. Yeah. Good.
Mr. Stinnett.
Does that mean we would see the applications prior to that interview process? We would see candidates for election on the city website by now. If there was an election coming up, I just wonder why it's different and how it's different. And I wonder how responsive we can be to each candidate when we are interviewing them. Can we ask them follow-up questions based on their answers? I mean, how how in depth can we get? I would like to have some latitude and, or at least some direction on that.
The first part of your question, I didn't understand the questions and how you do those and everything. You all get to figure that out. That's your job. We'll help you do whatever you want to do there. And if you want to come 15 minutes early or do it in agenda session and talk about questions that and present those and have them listed out, that's how you can put that piece together. But I didn't quite understand the information out for election or appointment or what.
Well, I'll take that one, Mr. Myers, because if it was an election, it wouldn't be out on the public website until that election date for applications closed, and then it would be on there. And so this, right now, the candidates haven't even closed, so we don't know who all may be on until I believe Friday is the closing date. And so next Wednesday, when the agenda comes out, it will be on, or the Wednesday after they close, it'll be on the website who's applying.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Senate?
I think so. When I applied for as a candidate, it showed up on the city website not long after with my information, and I guess there have been applicants whose information is not available yet, and I guess I kind of wondered when we would get to see that.
And it is different because it's an appointed rather than an election. You know, if it was election, we got to go on the state guidelines. On this, we did not have to take applications. We chose to do it that way. That's the way we've done it in the past.
Okay, and we have a set of questions that we're going to ask everybody. Did I hear that correctly?
And so if you want to change from those questions that we'll present on the meeting of the 8th, if you want to change that, as long as it's consistent with everybody, I think that's the only fair way, is that everybody gets the same question, same opportunity.
Okay, and we're going to get to see those before then?
Yeah, Monday night of that meeting.
So the questions we're going to ask them, we're not going to get to see until the night we're going to ask them?
We go over that meeting prior to, this is the questions that we've done in the past. If you want to change them, we'll change them at that time.
Can we have more time to look at those questions?
I would just assume we bring them out, because that gives then everybody's on the same playing field. And that we've done it 4 or 5 times since I've been on council that way, and it's worked fine.
Okay. So I'm going to decide based on a list of questions that I won't see till the night of.
If you would like to change those questions at that time, that's when we would bring those up, but that's not going to go for the whole body. Mr. Fleck?
So we could do the questions at any point. The problem is, if we were to do them, say, via email, is that a serial meeting? You know, the problem is the way open meetings laws are. You know, we could do it in the Friday agenda session before the Monday meeting, where we just have a discussion, because it's a noticed meeting, and we can have a discussion on the questions then, which would give you, you know, all weekend long, you know, to deliberate if you wanted to change them. And then as Mayor Gowing says, we could also, you know, modify them in the 15 or 20 minutes before the meeting. But I think the risk, if we were to just put them out now, is that we'd run afoul of open meetings rules.
Mr. Irvin?
Yeah, and I mean, this is the source of the frustration. It's just unnatural. So it's hard to get used to. But I'd like to do that on the Friday agenda session meeting. And we do want this to be open to the public, and we don't want this air of, you know, secret meetings or anything like that, because they don't happen. In fact, very little communication happens, less than should happen. So I guess then we can come prepared with questions we'd like to propose. I think what I'm trying to think about is, this is someone that's going to sit on the council and is going to be a representative of that ward. And I'm concerned that there's not a ton of, it was the same case with me. Like, nobody had much say to put me in this position except for this last election. And in retrospect, I've been pretty heavily criticized that by a few people, that I'm part of the problem, where I'm not a good representation of the ward. And that's because nobody but the council had a say in it, and it's because of this process. And I'd like to try to change that if possible, or accommodate more input from the people, so that they do feel more represented, that they do have a say in it, and that maybe they do have a say in suggesting what some of the questions would be, what they care about right now, and what our future is going to look like. So that's.
Well, Mr. Irvin, I asked you these questions, or was in part of it to ask you these questions 3 times, because if I remember right, you applied 3 times before you were appointed. So the questions have been out there. They're not something new.
They may not represent what people care about the most.
Okay.
Amen, Councilor Irvin. I want the public to buy into our choice for Ward 1 council representative, and whatever we can do.
Mr. Myers.
And I believe that the applications we have right now are public information, but the challenge is, do we put that out as they come in, and how do we get that out to you that, hey, here's the 3 that we have presently, and then somebody come in the next day. We could do like we do for the elections, but do you want us to do that? I mean, we were holding them until Friday, and then we put them out. Here are the people that have applied on Friday, and everybody would know them then well before the meeting, and even before the agenda's out. Yeah.
Mr. Fleck.
I think this is a great conversation, and there's certainly, we're not stuck by this timeline. I mean, we have the application dates out. We could certainly always have one meeting to take input on the process, and then, actually make the appointment at a future meeting. I mean, we're not stuck here. And I guess I'm hearing the concerns, of the other counselors. But when, at the end of the day, it is the other 6 of us that are going to ultimately appoint that person to this, and we are the ones who are elected to represent the citizens. And short of having a special election, it's the only way to actually do that. So like I said, I'm open to whatever process, but I do believe it will be as fair as possible, and I'm open to prolonging it if that will get more input and more buy-in. So I'm open to whatever you guys want.
I have a question, if someone can help me.
This is not the time to be asking the questions.
Well, I would like to know who my ward council member is. I live in Ward 2. I can't find it on the website.
That's Mr. Stennett.
That would be me.
Oh, okay. Thank you. The website is rather convoluted. It doesn't have a lot of information, so I'll take it up next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks. Miss Roddy, you had some stuff to comment on?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm cutting out. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The YAC is moving forward on having being supportive of the If I Were Mayor contest, and one thing we propose doing is on our March 1st meeting having a workshop opportunity, so students who are thinking
She did freeze.
I think she had some internet issues.
Yeah. Is she coming back? Nope. Oh. Are you still there, MJ?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. We can't see you, but we can hear you now. So maybe without your video, you'll not cut
Okay.
out.
Yeah, it's freezing a bunch. I was saying that on March 1st, we're having a meeting that's going to be a workshop for the If I Were Mayor contest. So we can have more ideas and more ideas that are central to what a mayor would actually do. We're inviting you guys to come so you guys can inform them and help them think of ideas and what they want to do for their projects. And we're getting that out to elementary schools and the high schools this week. I already sent it out, so that's good.
What day was that? Though you're in time that you're inviting us to?
March 1st at 6:30.
March 1st?
Okay, so I've got, I had a resident in Cottage Grove call me right before the meeting and wanted to express his concern over the governor not allowing us to have restaurants open, and he felt it was an abuse of power that that the university's still open, but we still can't have restaurants open. So he wanted me to share that publicly, and he said I could even give his initials. They're GB. and then the other thing, sometimes being mayor has got a lot of really fun stuff. Today I got to come down to City Hall, and you guys all know the LCOG has a banquet coming up in next month, and it's free, so everybody go to it this year because they're going to do a virtual, and it'll be a virtual presentation. But I nominated the city manager for Outstanding Public Employee of the Year for LCOG, and he received the award. Those of you that's worked around the city manager knows he's outstanding and goes over and above his job. So Richard, if you'd like to hold up your award, please. So we got to come down and give him that today, and I think I surprised him. And with that,
Yes.
we will move into the city manager report.
Just a few items, and I had a note written down here, and I've lost it in the stuff that I'm taking notes for Trudy and everything too. Trudy was ill today and came in for a little bit and then wasn't able to stay, and so she's not here. And so doing city recording stuff as I'm doing city manager stuff reminds me of the olden days. But do want to remind everyone that you need to complete your SEIs. If you haven't done that yet, please do that. You have until April 15th, so there's still a little deadline, but it's relatively easy. Go online. If you don't remember your password because you only do it once a year, or if you haven't set one up yet, you'll need to create that account and set that up and do that. But please do not forget to do your SEIs before April 15th. Do them early so you can get it done. And that's very important. And the state does not mess around with that at all. So I'm trying to find my other notes on, where did I put those? That's weird. Oh, here it is. Yeah, and the If I Were Mayor, MJ mentioned that already, the workshop on the 1st at 6:30. Please come. The mayor's going to be there. Other councilors you can come to, but we have a quorum issue then. We're not going to post it as a public meeting, but you could come and sit and watch, I guess, because it is a meeting, but it is available for those youth. 4th and 5th graders do a poster, 6th through 8th do the essays, and high school students do the media presentation. So that's, the YAC is excited to kind of promote that and try to put together a workshop and get ideas and pull things together. And then the LCOG awards, virtual awards dinner is March 5th, and it's free, so please register for it, and that's it.
Mr. Stennett.
Did I hear you say 4th through 6th was in the essay?
4th through 5th is the poster, 6th through 8th is the essay.
So Fourth
Middle
or sixth.
school. Yeah.
You're not going to take an essay from a fourth grader.
No. Well, we could, but the state contest, it won't. They want posters. But you can.
All right.
The posters that have won look like essays. A lot of them, I think. If you go on the Oregon Mayors Association page, there's some samples, and we'll be sharing those with the YAC workshop. Basically, they wrote a small essay, but they put it on the poster and drew pictures with it. So you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a fourth grader with some fantastic ideas. So.
We look forward to that. Okay, so we have no attorney tonight, and there's no items removed from the consent agenda. We're adjourned.
2 3-hour meetings.